At its peak, the Roman Empire controlled over 5 million square kilometers of land and governed roughly 1/4 of the entire world's population. That is not a metaphor. That is a single political entity stretching from the deserts of North Africa to the forests of Scotland, holding together dozens of languages, hundreds of cultures, and millions of lives under one flag. And then, in what historians still debate as one of the most complex collapses in human history, it fell apart. In the next 10 minutes, you are going to discover exactly how a small city on the banks of the Tiber River became the most powerful force the ancient world had ever seen, and then watch it unravel across centuries of war, betrayal, economic disaster, and political chaos. We will cover the founding myths, the Republic, the brutal transition to empire, and the slow decay that eventually brought Rome to its knees. And here is the part that most documentaries skip over entirely: the fall of Rome was not a single dramatic moment. It was a process so gradual that most Romans living through it had no idea it was happening at all. According to Roman tradition, the city of Rome was founded in 753 BC by twin brothers Romulus and Remus, raised by a wolf and descended from the Trojan hero Aeneas. The reality, of course, is far more complicated and far less cinematic. Archaeological evidence suggests that a collection of small Latin-speaking villages on the hills above the Tiber River gradually merged into a single urban settlement sometime in the 8th century BC. These early Romans were farmers, shepherds, and traders, living in the shadow of a far more sophisticated civilization, the Etruscans to the north, who would heavily influence Roman religion, architecture, and political structure. For the first 2.5 centuries, Rome was a monarchy ruled by 7 kings. But in 509 BC, the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, whose name literally translates to Tarquin the Proud, was overthrown in an aristocratic revolt. The Romans, deeply scarred by monarchical tyranny, replaced kingship with the Roman Republic. This was a radical political experiment. Power was divided between 2 annually elected consuls, a senate of aristocratic elders, and various popular assemblies. The genius of the system was its built-in resistance to one-man rule. No single person could dominate the state, at least, that was the theory. Over the next 4 centuries, Rome expanded aggressively. The Punic Wars against Carthage, fought between 264 and 146 BC, represent some of the most brutal and consequential conflicts in ancient history. At the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca surrounded and annihilated a Roman army of roughly 70,000 men in a single afternoon. It remains one of the worst military defeats in Roman history. And yet Rome did not surrender. The Republic absorbed the loss, raised new armies, and ultimately destroyed Carthage so completely that Roman generals ordered salt plowed into its fields. That relentless resilience is what set Rome apart from every other ancient power. But here is what nobody talks about. The very conquests that made Rome powerful also planted the seeds of its eventual destruction. As Rome absorbed the Mediterranean world, enormous wealth flooded back into the city, but it flowed almost entirely to the aristocratic class. Small farmers, who had served in the legions while their fields went untended, returned home to find themselves bankrupt and landless. The gap between rich and poor widened into a chasm. Political reformers like Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus tried to redistribute land in the late 2nd century BC and were both murdered for their efforts. The Republic was cracking. The 1st century BC became a generation of civil wars. Marius versus Sulla. Caesar versus Pompey. Mark Antony versus Octavian. Each conflict was more destructive than the last, and each one demonstrated that the old republican institutions were no longer capable of governing an empire of this scale. Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, an act of open military defiance that made civil war inevitable. His assassination on the Ides of March in 44 BC did not restore the Republic. It only deepened the crisis. When Octavian finally defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, he became the undisputed master of the Roman world. With extraordinary political cleverness, he never called himself king or dictator. Instead, he styled himself Augustus, the revered one, and claimed only to be the first citizen of a restored republic. Nobody was fooled, but nobody complained either. After a century of bloodshed, Romans desperately wanted stability. The Roman Empire had begun. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, lasted roughly 200 years, from the reign of Augustus until the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 AD. During this period, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent under Emperor Trajan, who pushed Roman borders into modern-day Romania and Mesopotamia. Trade networks connected Britain to Egypt. Roman roads totaling over 400,000 kilometers knit the empire together. Clean water flowed through aqueducts into cities across 3 continents. By most measurable standards of ancient civilization, this was humanity's highest achievement to that point. But here is the critical turning point. When Marcus Aurelius died, he broke with the tradition of adopting a capable successor and instead left the throne to his biological son, Commodus. It was a decision that historians have identified as one of the first major cracks in imperial stability. Commodus was erratic, narcissistic, and genuinely incompetent as an administrator. He famously renamed Rome after himself, declared himself the reincarnation of Hercules, and spent more time performing in the arena as a gladiator than governing the empire. After Commodus was strangled in his bath in 192 AD, Rome entered a catastrophic period known as the Crisis of the 3rd century, spanning from 235 to 284 AD. In those 50 years, the empire saw over 50 different emperors. Most died violently. The economy collapsed as emperors debased the currency to pay their armies, triggering inflation so severe that the silver content of Roman coins dropped from around 85% to less than 5%. External pressures mounted as Germanic tribes pushed harder against the northern frontiers, and the new Sassanid Persian Empire challenged Rome in the east. Diocletian stabilized the empire briefly by splitting it administratively into eastern and western halves, and Constantine the Great moved the capital to Constantinople in 330 AD, a decision that permanently shifted Rome's center of gravity. Constantine also legalized Christianity, which would transform Roman culture from its foundations upward. These reforms bought time. They did not fix the underlying problems. What actually killed the Western Roman Empire? This is where historians genuinely disagree. Edward Gibbon, writing in the 18th century, blamed Christianity and barbarism. Modern historians point to a far more complex web of causes. The economic model was unsustainable. An empire built on slave labor and continuous conquest had no mechanism for internal growth once expansion stopped. Military costs consumed the treasury. The bureaucracy became bloated and corrupt. And crucially, the Romans increasingly relied on Germanic foederati, allied barbarian soldiers, to defend borders they could no longer man with Roman citizens. The Visigoth sack of Rome in 410 AD sent shockwaves through the ancient world. Saint Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, described it as the end of civilization. But the city was not destroyed. The real death blow came in 476 AD when the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor, a teenager named Romulus Augustulus, a painfully ironic name combining the founder of Rome and the founder of the empire. Odoacer simply did not bother appointing a replacement. There was no dramatic final battle. The Western Empire did not collapse. It quietly became irrelevant. The Eastern Roman Empire, which we call the Byzantine Empire, continued for nearly another 1,000 years until the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453. This single fact demolishes the popular image of Rome simply burning and disappearing. Rome transformed, adapted, and survived in the East long after the West had fragmented into feudal kingdoms. What does Rome's story ultimately teach us? Every civilization that has ever dominated the world has believed it was permanent. Rome's greatest weakness was not its enemies. Before you go, if you learned something valuable today, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to History Vault YT for a brand new video every single day. We will see you in the next one.